B'Shem Hashem na'aseh v'natzliach. Welcome back to our weekly shiur on the Zera Shimshon on the Parashat Chukat Be'ezrat Hashem. We'll start. This shiur is also dedicated to Leilui Nishmat Eliyahu ben Nisim Bakshi, and also Rafael ben Munavar and Emmanuel ben Munavar, and for the Refuah Shelema of Kol Chole Am Yisrael. So a lot of things happen in this week's Parashat Chukat. We're going to take one of the things that the Parashat, that the Zera Shimshon picks, one of the ots, and we're going to discuss it, Bezrat Hashem, together. And obviously, as we always say, the shiur is also dedicated to Leilui Nishmat, the Zera Shimshon himself, Rav Shimshon Nachmani. Yeah, I said that. I said what you said before. What was it again? Faruch Bad Rahami. Okay, so in the parasha is the subject when the Jews ask about water. They say, "Oh, we're thirsty," and they're asking for water, right? And over there, the parasha says that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, "Here's where you're going to get water." And ve'ishkita et ha'adav et be'iram, you shall give water to the Edah, which is the congregation, or basically talking about the Jews, give water to the Jews and their cattle and their animals, right? Here's where we learn that how God cares for animals, right? Or how, what's the word? The laws of animal rights and animal cruelty coming from the Torah. It's not from here, by the way, I'm making a joke. But our question for tonight of the Zera Shimshon is going to be along those lines. Right? So it says, "Ve'ishkita et ha'edav et be'iram," you shall give water to drink to the congregation and their animals. Rashi says surprisingly here, as Zera Shimshon notes, "Melamed shechas HaKadosh Baruch Hu al memonam shel Israel." This shows that God cares and puts extra attention for the money of Bnei Israel. When it comes to Jews' money, their belongings. The Jews had a lot of cattle. They had a lot of, and what was cattle those days? It was currency, right? The more cattle you owned, the more money you had. It was what you traded for different things. That's what it was. People were farmers. They were shepherds, and this was currency. So they had cattle. So Rashi over here says, you know why Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu after the Jews asked for water and they said they're thirsty, you know why God turned to Moshe Rabbeinu and said, here's where you're going to get water, give water to the Jews and give water to their animals. Rashi comes out and says, you know why God says give water to their animals? Because God cares for your money, for your belongings. Now I'm sure, if you were reading this pasuk, you would say, it shows that God cares for animals, right? Just like God cares for human beings, which we see quite a lot in the Torah. All the laws and regulations on how to treat animals in the Torah, there is an isur in the Torah, for instance, right? As an example, one of the laws in the Torah is tzar ba'alei chayim. You're not allowed to make animals suffer, right? That is a law in the Torah. And it consists of very, very minor things that you would never think of. That's why when people ask me all the time, like, Rabbi, is a Jew, how come Orthodox Jews don't own pets, for instance? Right? Or is a Jew allowed to own a dog? So technically speaking, yes. So why don't they own dogs? So I always tell them, I'm like, because when you own pets, there's so much room for error. You could be doing a Torah lav at any moment. Right? You could be going over a Torah negative law at any time. And it's very, very difficult. Therefore, we stay away from it when you don't need it. If you have cattle, or if you live in a place where you need a dog for a guard dog when you have to have, okay, right. But when you're just needing it for a pet, or as people use as an excuse on a plane, it's an emotional assistant so that they can just bring their pet on a plane and annoy everybody else. Right? For that reason, that's why many Orthodox Jews don't Some do, yes, but many don't.
My friend in Hancock Park, he had a Doberman.
Some do.
He has like 8 kids, so they have like a Doberman.
Many don't. And I'll tell you why. For instance, let's say, you know how when you wash netilat yadayim, right, for hamotzi, you're supposed to make hamotzi right away. You're not allowed to talk about things that are not regarded during the meal, right? Let's say you say, you've washed and you say, pass me the salt. You're allowed to say, pass me the salt. That is not considered what we call a hefsek, which means a separation between netilat yadayim to the bracha of hamotzi, because they're supposed to be attached. So you're allowed to say, hey, pass me the salt. There's other things you shouldn't say. However, if you come and all of a sudden realize you're about to make hamotzi and give bread to your family, and you realize, oh my gosh, I forgot to feed the dog. Not only are you allowed to say to the members of your family, did you feed the dog? You're not allowed to make hamotzi until you feed the dog. Right? According to Torah, you're not allowed to eat if your animal hasn't eaten. Right? How many times can we possibly make this mistake when we're really hungry? We order food out, right? We sit down to chow down on that burger and the dog's like sitting there looking at you, right? And the dog doesn't have a communication like a human being does that could say, I'm hungry now, I need some food. So right there, as you're eating your burger, making hamotzi, doing netilat yadayim, all the mitzvot you could, which are midarabanan, by the way, rabbinic laws, you are eating and doing a Torah, you're going over a Torah law of torturing a speechless animal by not feeding it on time.
Yeah, but laws don't have boundaries, though.
Right? So keep your comments till the end. You just eat right now. That's one point, right? The sensitivity. People that own chickens that lay eggs, there's a lot of laws that go into that. If the chicken's laying on the egg or it's sleeping, don't startle it to take the eggs. You know, if you're going to walk by their coop and you see they're sleeping, don't startle them. You know, there's so many different things that you have to be so sensitive to animals. Now, this is not because Judaism is all like, you know, I don't know. I don't want to save the whales type of a message. It's not. You know, I'm not saying kill the whales, God willing, God forbid. That's not. That's not the message of Judaism, God forbid. But I'm saying we have limitations and we have guidelines. You're not allowed to make any animals suffer, period, whatsoever. So there's a lot of thought that goes into bringing out these laws from the Torah as to how you're supposed to react when you have situations like this. But we also know our limitations, which means if there is a village and they're all starving to death and there's only, you know, the only way you could feed them is fish from a certain river, and the fish might go extinct, we don't go, oh, you know what, let them starve, we have to save the fish. We don't do that either, which happens a lot in these groups that call themselves, you know, animal rights groups, where they go way overboard when they're trying to save an animal, not thinking of the human beings around that animal. So in the Torah, it's a little different. Obviously, human life always comes first, but that doesn't mean that a human can take the life of animals for granted and torture them and make them suffer, God forbid. That is a law from the Torah, and there's a lot of laws that go into that, right? That's why we have the whole laws of shechita, of ritual slaughter, kosher slaughter. If you look into the science behind it, every single halakha that has to be followed in order to ritually slaughter an animal is based on the fact that that animal should not suffer more than it should, right? A lot goes into making sure that the animal feels minimum amount of pain. Because just because we need to eat, that doesn't mean that the animal should suffer, you know? So make it as minimum as possible. Anyway, we're going sidetracked here. So the question here, and it's not really sidetracked because the Zer Shimshon kind of is asking this question. It says, Makshim, the Mefarshim ask, the commentators ask on this, that Rashi says, why is it that when Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, feed the Jews, give the Jews water and give water to their animals, Rashi says this shows that God worries about the Jewish the Jews' money, their belongings. Why isn't it that Rashi didn't use this pasuk to say, hey, this is another example of taking care of your animals? Right? So the Mefarshim ask, Minayin lo Rashi lirmod mi pasuk zeh? How does Rashi know to learn from this pasuk that HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares for the Jewish people's belongings? Maybe lekach nemar v'ishkita et ha'eda v'et be'iram ki kach hayta shelat Yisrael. Maybe, forget about the animal rights and animal cruelty and stuff. Maybe God answered this way to Bnei Israel, to Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Because this is what the Jews actually asked for. Right? What did they say? Because when the Jews came to Moshe Rabbeinu asking for I was about to say asking for money. When the Jews came to Moshe Rabbeinu asking for water, they said, Lama namut anachnu v'irenu. Why should we and our animals die? That's how they asked for it. They said, we need water. Why should we and our animals die in the desert? So Hashem's answering, okay, here's how you're going to give them water. Give them water and give their animals too, because they asked for their animals. So where is Rashi getting this from, that God cares? Over here, God is showing that He cares for their belongings. Maybe no. Maybe the pasuk is actually saying what it's saying because it's the answer to their request. Their request was we and our animals need water. And Hashem is saying, here's water for you and your animals. Do you understand the question? Yes?
I don't understand the question.
You don't understand the question? Question is basically as follows. Rashi says, because the pasuk says, Veishkita et ha'edav et be'iram, you shall give water to Bnei Israel and their animals. Rashi says, you know why it adds the animals as well as the human beings? When God says, give water to Bnei Israel and their animals, because God cares for the Jewish people's money and their belongings, which was their animals. So the commentators ask, no, maybe that's not why God said give water to their animals too. Maybe God's really just answering the request. When the Jews asked for money in the desert, I did it. When the Jews asked for water in the desert, right? They said, why should we and our animals die in the desert of thirst? So maybe God's answer was to the request. Moshe Rabbeinu here, give water to them and their animals, because they requested for their animals. Why should we go roundabout and say, you know why, God? It was because He cares for their money. Maybe no, He's just answered the request the way that it was requested. Claro? Now you see, you never know. He says we need to ask again on Rashi. Because this is something very simple. Devar pashutu says it's a very simple idea. Shakadosh Baruch Hu noten lechol beriyah dai machsero, as we said. God gives to every being on earth according to their needs. So it's a very simple thing for me to understand. Whatever a being on this earth needs, God provides. Right? And with His mercy, He provides the needs of animals and the human beings and everybody. You need food, He provides the food. How do you think birds survive? You think there's human beings on every corner of Pico putting their rice from Shabbat on the street? No, you don't find that everywhere. Only on certain corners of Pico Boulevard. Not on every corner of Pico Boulevard. On other streets, you don't see rice from Shabbat and challah from Shabbat on the street, right? So how do birds eat? How do they survive? HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows exactly what every single being needs and provides for them according to their needs. They'll survive, right? So maybe here too. And it says, from the great big animals, al betzekinim, all the way to even the eggs of the smallest creatures on earth, like lice. HaKadosh Baruch Hu maintains the life force for the biggest elephants to even lice. They need to survive. Who gives them their nourishment for life? Who gives them life? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God does all of that, right? So maybe here too, God is just caring for the animals. Hashem is, like we said, maybe Hashem is just saying, here's water for the Jews and their animals, because I care for everybody. They're also thirsty. They're also in the desert. Why is Rashi taking this pasuk and turning it into something about the Jews, their belongings and their, investments? Why couldn't it be just God being God? Right? You have to understand why this is such a good question. Because Rashi never tells us something that we don't need to know. And Rashi never delves into a subject unless there is something there for him to delve into. So there's books written, by the way, that are called What Was Bothering Rashi? Just to understand why Rashi had to say what he said. Rashi is just the simplest explanation of the Torah. He's the simplest commentator of the Torah. So if he ever said something explaining a pasuk in a way that we wouldn't have, there has to be a reason. Why did he go this route and not the normal route? Then that's what they're asking, right? Why did he have to go the business route? Just go the normal route, which is God is being a merciful God, caring for animals. We see that quite a lot in the Torah. Why does this stand out as something else? V'yesh lomar. Now he goes into answering it, Bezrat Hashem. He says, Rashi needed to express this pasuk the way he did because there was room to make a mistake and think, De Israel lo hayu zochim. We might have thought that the Jews were not deserving of God's mercy. What does that mean? And because they were not deserving of God's mercy in the desert, maybe the Jews should have just starved or had died of thirst in the desert. And maybe God only gave the Jews water in the merit of their animals. Meaning, if it wasn't because of the amount of cattle the Jews had, God wouldn't have even provided them water in the desert anymore. Because remember, what were we doing? We weren't just asking for water nicely. We were complaining. Jews don't normally complain.
Never.
Okay.
Money is earned, not given.
Right. Jews don't normally, but in the desert, we had a few mishaps, right? Of complaining about different things. And this was one of them. Oh, Moshe Rabbeinu, you took us out of the desert. You took us out of the land of milk and honey, Egypt, where we were slaves. You took us out of there to bring us into the desert to kill us. We're dying of thirst. Why should we die here? Why? Choda, So maybe, because we kind of we were such chutzpah to come to Moshe Rabbeinu with these requests, if you could even call it that, Hashem said, you know what? I'm done. I'm through. I thought I could help y'all, but it ain't happening. You know what I'm saying? Forget about it. Moshe, we'll just start new. All right? Maybe God was saying that it's not working out, and God's going to be like, you know what? Fine. Starve. I don't care. But then he saw the animals. The poor animals didn't do anything wrong, so he gave water for the animals. And we could have made that mistake. Because it has happened before that we've seen entire nations survive because of the animals. Where do we see that? Where do we see a message like that people survived in the zechut, in the merit of their animals? Huh? No. Noach, we don't see that they survived because of the animals. Noach saved the animals.
But it's the food of him feeding the animals, that's why they didn't drown.
Okay, so you could say, fine, he had that zechut also, but no. Noach had his own zechut. Noach was chosen by Hashem to start the new world. That wasn't because of the animals. You'll see where it is. as we found in the story of Alexander of Macedonia. Believe it or not, Alexander is mentioned many times in the Talmud. What was the story of Alexander in Macedonia? It was a Midrash, in Midrash Vayikra Rabbah, that says, there was a king from Africa, and Alexander was visiting Africa, and he was visiting by this king. And as he is visiting, two people come to the king for judgment. The king of Africa. And Alexander's there. He's overseeing things. Alexander was so big at the time that no one dared to he was in the position of saying, I don't know if I'm going to conquer you yet or not. I'm just going to observe right now. We'll see. Right? Which is something that happened with Israel also. I'll explain afterwards. So he's there observing. And two people come to the king. And they say, here's the dilemma that we have. This guy sold me a piece of land. Right? And I took the land fair and square. I paid for it. As I was, plowing. Thank you very much. My English is no good so much. As I was plowing the land, I found a treasure in this piece of land. So the king says, so you want to know if that treasure belongs to you or not? He goes, no. So what do you want? He says, I paid fair and square for just a piece of land, not for treasure. The treasure belongs to him, but he won't take it. So the other guy goes, my dear Lord, look, I sold a piece of land, fair and square, with whatever was in it. I didn't know there was treasure in it. Maybe I would have never found the treasure. I sold the whole land. So, he had mazal, Baruch Hashem, he found a piece of treasure there. That's not mine, it's his. He bought the land. It comes with whatever is in it. And they were fighting, no, you take the treasure. No, you take the treasure. No, you have to take it. It's not fantasy land. This happened. Okay? This is written in the Midrash. It was like, Tarot for that. Please, no, please. And it gets even better in the Tarot for. It's perfect for Tarot. So what does the king do in his wisdom? The king says, any of you have a son or a daughter? So one of them says, yes, I have a son. He's this old. And the other one says, yeah, I have a daughter. Is that old? It says, how about you two match your son and daughter together to get married and give the treasure to them to start their lives? So one looks at the other, goes, you agree? He goes, I agree. He goes, mazal tov. All right? And they get married, and and I guess they get married afterwards. He gives them the treasure. Now Alexander is watching this. And he says, so the African king looks at Alexander, and he sees that he's puzzled. So he says, my dear sir, Alexander, would you have dealt with this differently? Do you think I made a mistake? He says, I don't know, mistake or no mistake, I'll tell you what I would have done. I would have killed both of them and took the treasure. I'm the king. That's what Alexander says to the African king. I would have killed both of them and took the treasure for myself. For the king. For Macedonia. I don't know, whatever you call it. Right? And here's what the African king turns to him and says. He says, if the sun and the moon rise in where you live in your country, meaning if people in your country and your people survive, if the sun still rises where you are, it's not for the people, it's for the animals. What he was trying to tell him was, if God has mercy enough on you that you're still alive, has nothing to do with you because you're so cruel. It's in the merit of the animals that God has kept you and your people alive. That's how cruel you are. I don't know who this guy was. He was, to turn to Alexander to say what he said, it's a pretty big deal. But the Midrash says that he says it. And Alexander learns a lesson from him. And there's many, many different places where Alexander learns lessons, and the Talmud discusses those things from Chachamim, from different people. Right? So that's one, and the fact that the Midrash writes it, it means that there is truth to it. There are times that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has mercy on the surrounding people because the animals have no sin. So let me give rain. Let me give food for the animals. And in the merit of the animals that need food and water, as a collateral effect, the human beings will survive as well. So here too, we would have thought that, maybe Hashem only gave water for the animals because he didn't care for the Jews anymore. And in the zechut of the animals, the Jews survived. It wasn't he didn't give the water for the Jews per se. It was for the animals only. And in their zechut, the human beings also, the Jews also survived in the desert. Sorry. Velachen. And he says, therefore, Haiti Omer Shafkan Hishmianu HaKatuv. Maybe I would have thought over here too that the pasuk is trying to tell me, Beishkita et ha'edav et be'iram. Give water to the people and their cattle. Lomar, to tell you, Sherak bizchut ha'behemot. Only in the merit of the animals, Hayu hamayim le'Israel. Water would be supplied for the Jews. That's why the pasuk says, give water to the Jews and their animals. I would have thought, you know what? Why? Because it's for the animals, really. The Jews didn't really deserve it. Mishum hachi, therefore, so that we don't think this way, Rashi writes, Melamed, this comes to teach us, Shechas HaKadosh Baruch Hu al memonam shel Israel. This really comes to teach us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is actually very careful with the belongings of Am Yisrael. Which means Rashi is trying to tell us, no, it hadn't come to that breaking point yet. The Jews were deserving on their own. They didn't need the animals' merit to survive. So Rashi is telling me, not yet. The Jews hadn't broken the camel's back yet for God to say, you know what? Your only survival is in the zechut and the merit of the animals. That's what Rashi is trying to tell us. Why? Because the pasuk says, how does Rashi know? It says, Veishkita et ha'edav ve'et be'iram. You shall give water to drink to the Jews and their cattle. There's two ve'ets. It says, Veishkita et ha'edah, give water, et, to the edah, to the congregation, ve'et be'iram, and their cattle. See, there's an extra word, ve'et. In Hebrew, the word et, right, a lot of times is superfluous, is not needed. But when the extra one comes, it comes to teach us an extra lesson. Right? Like we learn how you have to have respect for, if someone has a stepmother or a stepfather, we learn it from an extra et in the Torah, that a stepmother and a stepfather is just like your own real mother and father. You have to have respect for them just like you would respect your mother and your own father. Right? Here, it should have said, if it wasn't so, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu really brought water from the rock, from the mountain, not for the zechut, not for the merit of the Jews, but only for the merit of the behemot, of the animals, the pasuk should have said what? Veishkita et ha'edah uv iram. Give water to Bnei Israel and their cattle. Uv iram, and their cattle. Why does it say et ha'edah ve'et be'iram? That's an extra. Give to them and them. It's like saying, and them. You don't need the extra the, right? But Bnei Israel, when they requested, it says, Lamut sham anachnu uv irenu. They didn't say, ve'et be'irenu, uv irenu. When Bnei Israel asked for it, they said, we would have died in the desert, us and our cattle, without the et. The Jews themselves didn't add the extra et in there. And he says, as we asked, maybe, he says, and maybe you might be even right. Maybe the Jews asked the question in a way they were telling HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, if we're not deserving to have water, If we've been so bad, at least do it in the zechut of our animals. Maybe that is what we were asking. There's no knowing of that. Maybe that is where we were at that point, psychologically. God, if you're not going to give water for us, at least have mercy on our animals. Right? Ve'im ken, and if so, if that was really our kavanah, hayadai shakadosh baruch hu yashiv leMoshe, Hakadosh Baruch Hu could have answered and the request of Moshe Rabbeinu, veishkita et ha'edah, so give water to the Jews. He wouldn't even have to add the word be'iram to give to their animals. He wouldn't have to write anything else. Why? Because if Hashem is going to give water to Bnei Israel, it's already going to be for their animals also. There's no need to mention the words animals. So he says, Vadai. Then of course, the fact that it says Ve'et be'iram, it's God's way in the Torah of showing that the behemoth, the animals, were secondary to Bnei Israel. To teach us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was only being careful with the Jews' belongings. Meaning, I still see you as my main people. And your animals are only your belongings to me. I don't want you to feel that I'm going to give the water for your animals, and in that merit, you're going to be fed also. No. So I'm looking at you as my prized possessions, my children, and your animals to me is just like a possession. That's what Rashi was trying to bring out from the word et. It's a different way of looking at Pasukim. That's why Rashi needed to point it out. To say, you would have thought that God is giving the water for the animals to save the Jews in their merit. Rashi's saying no. God's love was so strong for Bnei Israel, even though we were complaining and we were being so chutzpah, Hashem was saying, I still see you as my children, and your animals, just to prove it to you, they're just like your belongings to me. Yes, I care about animals too, but I'm just going to make a point to let you know, I'm not giving water for your animals only, and in the merit of the animals, you're surviving. No, I'm giving the water for you. And in your merit, your animals will survive too, because they belong to you. That was Rashi's trying to say that was God's way of showing his love and affection for his people in the desert, even though we were complaining so much with chutzpah, brazenness, of asking for water after God had done so much miracles for us, asking for water like that, it was, anyone else would have thought, you know what? We probably did survive because of the animals. Thank God when we came out of Egypt, we brought a lot of animals. Because if we didn't, on whose merit would have we survived? So this was Rashi's way of saying from this pasuk that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the water, not just for the animals, but really for the Jews, and in that way, we also had water for our animals. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.